son or daughter practicing his or her saxophone. Pretty soon, college football will begin. My wife has a high degree of tolerance for my football watching habits. In a more serious vein, have you ever found yourself in a situation where you really are losing your tolerance for another person? Perhaps his or her personality is incompatible with yours, or you're having trouble, big trouble with his or her opinions or viewpoints. You really know that you're right and that he's wrong or she's wrong, or you just simply don't get along with that particular person. It can truly be a test of your tolerance. But Paul reminds us in 1 Corinthians that love is patient and kind, addressing this to the church at Corinth, which was experiencing at that time divisive behavior because of the lack of tolerance for competing viewpoints on how to operate the church. But we know that tolerance of other opinions and ideas is not only the hallmark of a democratic republic, but also the hallmark of a healthy life. Respect for others' ideas and thoughts represents spiritual and emotional maturity, as well as kind and thoughtful behavior. The 19th century Russian physician and writer Anton Chekhov once defined a gentleman, and part of his definition included these words: "He is compassionate, for he grieves in the soul for what the naked eye does not see. Out of respect for other people's ears, he often remains silent. He respects a man's personality and therefore is always tolerant, polite, and yielding." Tolerance carries into all areas of life, including whether or not you decide to listen to other opinions and ideas. I had to remind myself to be patient and tolerant of my children's opinions and positions on various matters. We need youth to shock us a little bit, to bring us out of our trenches, and to remind us that there are sometimes better ways of looking at things. When I was in high school, my father didn't have a high degree of tolerance for the music we listened to. The Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Led Zeppelin, etc. But instead of butting heads about it, my brothers and I purchased for him at Christmas a 45 RPM of Led Zeppelin's song, "Whole Lotta Love," which he particularly disliked, and decided to present it to him as the very last gift on Christmas morning. And so there we were, playing "Whole Lotta Love" by Led Zeppelin. When the time came, we cranked the volume up and played it for the whole family on Christmas morning. Everybody had a great laugh. And the point of the story is that if one can laugh at himself a little bit, it makes a huge difference in how you get along with others and how much you tolerate others. But we know in this world of 24-hour and increasingly polarized news programs, unlimited tweets, and posts on Facebook, we are tempted to draw even deeper lines between contrasting ideas and opinions, and therefore less tolerance is the byproduct. America, though, was built on the back of many great ideas, tolerance and respect for the other side being one of them. We might not agree, but we still hear somebody out, knowing that compromise is important. One of the major problems in the world, we know, is the lack of tolerance. For Israel and the Palestinians, for instance, and generally speaking, have a lack of tolerance for the other. When we were in Israel a couple months ago, we heard directly from many of Israel's citizens of their dislike and their distrust of the Palestinians. I would imagine we would have heard the same from many of the Palestinians of their dislike and distrust of Israel. But if there was just a little tolerance, a little understanding think of the difference it might make. That's why it's important for us and for all Christians to encourage the spread of Christianity and its virtues. Our faith's main values, love, forgiveness, and grace, all lead, when practiced, to tolerance and respect. You can't have tolerance and respect if you don't have love, forgiveness, and grace. This is part of the Pharisees, the religious rulers of Jesus' day, problem, when they quickly became totally intolerant of Jesus. They were stuck on the law, ritual, and custom, and refused to give an inch to Jesus' way. That included loving your enemies, praying for those who persecute you, and above all, humility. Before Jesus entered Jerusalem, and what would turn out to be, as we know, his final week, the city fathers had already conspired to do away with him because he represented a radical departure from what they were used to. And then when he claimed he was actually the Son of God, which was blasphemy in their minds, the final nail was driven in the cross. Intolerance led Jesus to the cross. But when you show tolerance for others, you show humility. And when you show tolerance and humility, you show compassion and openness. Paul teaches us in 1 Thessalonians, respect those who labor among you and are over you, encourage the faint-hearted, help the weak, be patient with them all, always seek to do good to one another and to all. But it's important to remember, my friends, that we're all in this together. Each and every one of us is a child of God. That's very scriptural. Let us make man in our own image, so it tells us in Genesis. And all of us at some time in life are hurting. We're feeling some pain. We need understanding and patience and acceptance. Something goes wrong in our families. Something fails in our jobs. A tremendous disappointment strikes. We are saddened by death. A friend disappoints. We are excluded from something we thought we should be included to. We fall victim to sickness. Many are beset by the pains of older age. Many face anxiety and the temptations of youth. And many feel the pain of loneliness. We all have our share of difficulties. But again, we're all in this life together. It therefore becomes increasingly important for us to practice the ancient principle from Matthew 7:12. So whatever you wish others would do for you, so do for them. Howard Schultz, former CEO of Starbucks, said in his autobiography about his understanding of tolerance. He said that he grew up in the Brooklyn projects, and he said conducting ourselves with civility toward one another in shared living spaces, even when standing skin to sweaty skin in a tiny elevator between floors, was mandatory. Bonded by circumstance, he said, there was a comforting sense of community. Putting up with the other person. We are reminded of this principle by the famous 20th century scientist George Washington Carver, who rose from slavery to become one of the world's most respected and honored scientists, and who spent his formative years in Kansas. He said, how far you go in life depends on your being tender with the young, compassionate with the aged, sympathetic with the striving, and tolerant with the weak and the strong, because someday you will have been all of these. President Lincoln had that concept in his mind when he delivered his second inaugural address during the closing days of the Civil War. He said, with malice toward none, and charity for all. Lincoln's wish was to extend the olive branch, to extend toleration to the other side, because we are one as a nation. And with the assurance of Lincoln's words, Robert E. Lee knew that the terms of the surrender would be just and merciful. Years later, General Lee would say, "I surrendered as much to Lincoln's goodness as to Grant's armies." Now we know that the greatest example of tolerance was Jesus Christ. He tolerated all the people begging for his healing touch. He tolerated all the outcasts of society, and the lepers and the blind, the tax collectors and the adulterers and the poor. He tolerated his own disciples' disbelief. He tolerated the enemies of his own people, the Romans. He tolerated the hundreds and hundreds of people who could never figure out his message. And then there was never a better sign of tolerance than the cross. Jesus hung on the cross to forgive us for every intolerable thing that we did and continue to do. So he asks us a simple request: to tolerate the shortcomings and the differences and the opinions of others. So, if you tested your own tolerance, how would you score? On a 1 to 10 scale, where would you fall? Perhaps the goal of us, all of us, should be to match the Spirit of our Lord with his model of tolerance. And these are questions you can ask of yourself. Do you need to be more tolerant of your loved one, young or old, who continues to stumble and can't seem to be able to pull things together? Pray that you will find the right things to say. Do you need to be more tolerant with a loved one with a debilitating disease and demands a lot of care? Pray for strength. Do you need to be more tolerant of another opinion? Political, spiritual. Pray to God for openness. Do you need to be more tolerant of the family member, uncle, aunt, brother, cousin who just kind of drives you nuts sometimes? Pray for patience again. Do you need to be more tolerant of others' mistakes, knowing that you have made plenty of them yourself? Pray for patience. Do you need to be more patient and tolerant with children, knowing of the struggles that accompany childhood, along with peer pressure? Pray for understanding. And do you need to be more patient and understanding of the poor and those who scramble every day to make ends meet? Pray for compassion. A New York taxi driver tested his tolerance and patience when he was sent to pick up an elderly woman early in the morning. He honked his horn at her front door, but nobody responded. He honked repeatedly, but no response. And while almost driving away, he then decided to go to the front door, and he knocked on the front door, and he heard a frail voice say, "Wait a minute." A woman in her 90s opened the door, wearing a print dress and a pillowbox hat with a veil pinned on it. All the furniture in her place was covered with sheets. In the corner was a cardboard box with photos and glassware. The driver took the woman's suitcase and put it in the cab. And when she gave the driver the address to where she was going, she asked him if he could drive through downtown, to which the driver said, "That isn't the shortest route, and it's going to cost you more." She then said she wasn't in a real hurry. Her destination was the hospice. She said she didn't have any family left, that the doctor told her she didn't have long to live. He quickly reached over and shut off his meter. At her request, they drove through the neighborhood where she and her husband had lived and where they were newlyweds. They pulled up in front of a furniture warehouse that once had been a ballroom where she had gone dancing as a girl. Sometimes she asked him to slow down on a particular street where she could recall her younger years there. As the sun was rising, she told the driver that she was tired and it was time to go. They arrived at the hospice. Staff members greeted them. The driver took her small suitcase to the door. She asked him how much she owed him, to which he responded, nothing. The cab driver gave her a hug. She held on to him tightly and said, "You gave an old woman a moment of joy." He squeezed her hand and walked into the dim morning light. Behind him, a door shut. It was the sound of a closing of a life. The driver said he didn't pick up any more passengers that shift, just drove around, deep in emotion, and thought to himself, what if I had refused to take the run or honked just once and then driven away? I don't think I have done anything more important in life. It was a moment that flashed in front of him like no other moment had done before. All because he showed a little patience and understanding instead of plunging ahead with his familiar routine. A few weeks before his death from cancer, Cardinal Joseph Bernardin of Chicago gave an interview to the New York Times. He told of the many experiences in his ministry, including a day when he visited a prisoner on death row on the day of his execution. You know, the Cardinal told the doomed man, both of us are going to die soon. You're going to die tonight. I'm not sure when I'm going to die, but it's not before too long. So let's talk. Let's pray. The Cardinal's words gave the man a sense of calm, and shortly after his execution, one of the man's attorneys asked to see the Cardinal. While in jail, the man had taught himself to paint, and 2 minutes before his execution, he telephoned his attorney to say that he wanted to give the Cardinal one of his paintings. Quite a story. 2 men, one inside the law, another outside the law, but linked together by Christ. I was in prison, and you came to see me, said Jesus. For all of those who need us, for all of those we need, we are brought together by Christ. But we first must stop